All right, looks like I'm on. How are you doing? I hope all of you can see this. I changed where I am projecting because, frankly, I just got a little bit tired of the other place and I want to build a stand. So it took a little bit longer than I thought to set up, like everything does. It always takes a little bit longer, but I got it done. And I got a couple things just a little bit different today, but hopefully you can see me. And it seems like there's already some people on. If there's any problem hearing me, please let me know. You're getting my YouTube studio page right now. Where's my mouse? Okay, so. And which isn't working. All right, so hopefully all of you can see that screen right there, which should be Germany right after they took Czechoslovakia. So Czechoslovakia, well, just to review a couple things from yesterday, we went over Ethiopia, which Italy invaded, the Spanish Civil War, which Britain and France, they stayed out, while Italy and Germany fought and won with the fascists in Franco, even though Spain was so destroyed by the war that they could not enter it. And let me move one thing really quick. No, I think this will work. Okay, so if anybody has any question, please chat or put it on the chat and let me know. I have it right in front of me, so I'll be able to see. Hopefully this will work. And hopefully I'm not too dark. I had a great plan of having my big picture window in my living room open so I'd have light so I could stand. Well, it's cloudy here and it snowed a little bit, which I think is unfair. Okay, so back to this then. One thing about Spain that I didn't say because the video didn't work, so I was a little bit discombobulated. This made the liberal democracies, meaning those democracies, or at least kind of democracies like Britain and France, that wanted individual rights, freedoms, the right to vote, it made them look weak. And it seemed that fascism was the answer for a strong nation. And so, or conservatism, ultra-conservatism was on the rise. And then we have the Rhineland, and I can't emphasize that enough. When Germany remilitarized the Rhineland in 1936, that led to Britain and France standing down, didn't stop them, and so Hitler felt that they weren't going to stop him. He could begin to rebuild the army very slowly, but they initiated conscription again and came out in the open with tanks and planes and such things as that. And one more thing about that. Sorry, just something popped up on my screen. Okay, good. But that is the best example of appeasement. Appeasement means giving into aggression. Now, everybody, to this day, not everybody, but when they talk about appeasement, they'll bring up Munich in 38. Well, by 38, it was too late. Hitler wanted war. Hitler was going to war in 38. He wanted war in 38. He was actually disappointed that the British and French backed down so much. But 36 is when they had a chance to stop. When they had a chance to stop Hitler. And also in 38, don't forget that it's Anschluss, where Germany reunified with Austria. As you can see on the map, where's my mouse? Oops. Right here, I'm using the little cursor button right there, so hopefully you see that little circle. And at Munich, that is where Britain, France, well, especially Britain, Chamberlain, gave Germany the Sudetenland, and Czechoslovakia and the Soviet Union were not even allowed, and they will not forget this. A few months later, Germany took all of Czechoslovakia. And so that is the Greater Germany Greater Germany in 1939. They annexed this part of Czechoslovakia and East Prussia. Here is Germany. A couple things I want to show you. Since I was a little bit off, I want to show you one little bit of a film clip. So here's appeasement, things I showed you yesterday. Here is Chamberlain. And Chamberlain has come down through history as somebody who... Did it work? Okay, good. Chamberlain has come down historically as somebody who gave in, as a fool, who has a really bad comb over and a bad dye job. I think you see it with right here. It's gray here. It's almost black here, and then the comb over right here, the big part. Hey, whatever. He was in his 70s. Remember, he had never flown on a plane before until he went to Munich to meet with Hitler. But when he got back, he really was seen as a hero, the man who brought peace. And those who thought Britain cannot trust Hitler, people like Winston Churchill, were seen as pariahs. They were seen as pariahs as late as the summer of 1939. So let's just watch a little bit of Neville Chamberlain. And hopefully this works. So just to backtrack just a little bit. Here, the man who saved us from the greatest war of all. This is when he's arriving back, his second time on the plane on the way back. He is seen as a hero. The cheers, I mean, there's just overwhelming cheers. Daladier of France felt the same thing. So you hear them all cheer when he waves that piece of paper. Now, you're going to watch just a little bit of the creative process here because I think there's something wrong with the sound, and I might have to adjust it. So you're going to see the very creepy view into the void. Don't look into the void. Don't look into the void. Don't look into the void. Almost ended this. All right. So I'm going to play just a little bit again. Let me tell if you can hear this and not just the captions.
Some of you perhaps have already heard what it contains, but I would just like to read it to you. We, the German Führer and Chancellor, have had a further meeting today and are agreed in recognizing that the question of Anglo-German relations is of the first importance for the two countries and for Europe.
So we keep playing that a little bit longer, but he was met as almost a conquering hero. He brought back peace, and I can't emphasize that enough. So I just want to show you that. And then we have, so the Czechs are all alone. This is the part of Czechoslovakia they lost. And here's the thing we got to start then today. After Czechoslovakia, I'm so glad you can hear. Yay! So little tidbits, I figured out how to make it work, and I think it will work now. The big thing I had is I wanted to have an earpiece so I could hear and talk and not get the double sound. And I had to, it takes a while to get used to the studio function. Isn't this exciting? Okay, this is something that it is. Hey, I'm glad, hopefully this helps things, but I wish I wouldn't have had to figure it out, but that's the life we have. So, back to this. So, after Hitler took the rest of Czechoslovakia, and by the way, there's a great picture of the Nazi tiger chewing on the umbrella. You notice the umbrella, and that had appeasement. One of the symbols of Great Britain is the umbrella, because it rains all the time. So, especially 50, 60 years ago, the people carrying an umbrella around. And that was Britain. So that was appeasement. And so the umbrella would come to be a symbol of appeasement in the 50s and 60s. There's a famous scene of the only film that shows the entire, of all the moments of the Kennedy assassination in Dallas in November 1963. And somebody was protesting Kennedy because they thought Kennedy was appeasing the communists. And you can see it right before Kennedy is shot. Someone putting up an umbrella, symbolizing Chamberlain. Okay, so Chamberlain vows to stop Hitler, and this time he means it. But if you're Hitler, would you believe Neville Chamberlain? Would you believe the French, which were afraid to act alone, even though Daladier knew he had to? Was it Georges of Daladier? But Britain does begin to rebuild, and they make a few mistakes, especially in tanks. By the way, if you look outside, at least here at my house, it is now snowing again. Okay, so Hitler looks to his next target, and Hitler did not have a plan. It was more like what he can get away with. Grab what's next, grab what's next. But don't forget, Lebensraum. Lebensraum was his strategy to get land in the east, living space. So here we go. We had a shot that came in here that shouldn't have been in here. So let's get to the Polish corridor, because we already had Kristallnacht. And one thing I forgot to say about Kristallnacht, I want to make sure we got this. You can hardly see Paris, but a German diplomat was killed in Paris. We mentioned that before. A pogrom is an organized attack, usually against Jews. But I want to make sure you got this. This was to drive them out before the war. Hitler knew war was coming, and he didn't want an enemy within in case they were fighting for what he would soon call against the Soviets a war of annihilation. So there we have the next spot he went after. It's called the Polish corridor. And the Polish corridor is right there. This region right there. The Polish corridor. This is Prussia. Right there. And after the Treaty of Versailles, it was kind of ham-handedly done, but they gave Poland this access to the sea and the harbor of Danzig, which is the German name. Now it is Gdansk and part of Poland. And if you know anything about the map of the world today, this whole area here of Silesia and Prussia right here, this is all part of Poland now. The German border is right there. But these areas in green are areas with a German population. So there's a lot of Poles who live there, but a lot of ethnically German people inside of Poland. And Hitler said, just like the Sudetenland, they are being mistreated, these ethnic Germans. But Poland had a pretty nasty military dictatorship. In fact, Poland was a dynamic, growing country that many Germans thought was a real threat in the 20s, became very static and in decline in the 30s. Stagnant as the rest of the world changed. Poland actually had a fairly strong army and defeated a Soviet invasion in 1923, maybe saving Germany. And by 1938, they were in decline. And they were a pretty nasty dictatorship. They scooped up a part of Czechoslovakia right after the Munich Accord right there. Let me get my little pointer right there. And so with that, Germany began to claim, of course, Poland's mistreating them, and he would threaten war. But Britain and France both signed a military alliance with Poland. And this was seen as a big deal because Poland was a pretty nasty dictatorship, and Britain and France always held them at arm's length, as they see it the lesser of two evils. And France and Britain both decided to start talking to somebody they hated, the Soviet Union. And when Hitler did this, and here you have the shot of Poland, and there's the corridor, Hitler about ready to cut off the neck of the goose, Hitler's fear of a two-front war. Remember World War I. Germany was squashed by the Russians and then the British and the French. And then eventually, by the time the Russians were defeated, the Germans were so exhausted when the Americans came in, Germany was defeated. And so he feared a two-front war. And he was worried that if they attacked Poland, here come the British and the French. And there's virtually no major defenses, at least not a lot of troops. And so he began to consider a deal he saw with the devil, the Soviet Union. He knew that the Soviet Union was angry about not being invited to Munich. Britain and France both feared the Soviets. The Soviets they would get and then make that permanent after World War II, which is now like Belarus and part of Ukraine and even a couple of smidges of Russia. And so he began to negotiate secretly with the Soviet Union. And don't forget, the mortal enemy of fascists were communists, and here they're talking with the Soviet Union. This should tell you something about the leader. First off, don't forget, in fascist or authoritarian, totalitarian states, the leader is never wrong. So when the leader makes a 180-degree turn, they present it as, of course the leader would do this. The leader knows what's best. The leader sees things that you don't. Sure, the leader might have said something else before, but that is irrelevant. They make the right decision. This was always his plan. He's playing 42-dimensional chess. That's what they tried to imply it as. But the reality was, Hitler was an opportunist, Stalin was an opportunist. And they both saw in the short run, this will give us an advantage. And this tells you what you really need to know about authoritarian dictators. They'll do whatever will benefit them. Now they'll present it as what will help the state, but it's always to what benefit them. You can always tell an authoritarian personality. Their first thought, themselves. I point at me like I'm an authoritarian dictator. Which, hey, but they begin to negotiate. And one more thing. We'll talk about this more later. But Stalin, copying Hitler's Night of the Long Knives, Stalin had begun something called the Purges, where they have destroyed almost all of his rivals. And his rivals, I don't mean like members of other movements or socialists or moderate socialists, fascists, or monarchists. No. What Stalin did in 36, 37, and 38 is he got rid of virtually every high-level Bolshevik and every high-level member of the Red Army that he saw could be a threat to them. He removed them, saying that they're secretly fascist and working with Hitler, and gave all kinds of names to them. Most of them would be tortured, and they would give names, and then they would be killed. This would be the most horrific time of Stalin's rule, called the Terror. Now let's got to be clear. Most of those people that he was getting rid of, other members of the Communist Party and old Bolsheviks, were pretty horrible people. But still, he's getting rid of what people thought were his allies. In fact, he even had one of his best friends, Sergei Kirov, killed and blamed it on fascists, and then used that as an excuse to torture and murder thousands. But the thing was, he had killed 2/3 of his officer corps. The only officers that remained were desperately loyal to Stalin. The problem is, in 1939, his army is not ready to fight. So he is thinking, I need time. Hitler does not want a two-front war. And that leads to this thing. First off, he knows, and I'm sorry that Stalin got covered up, but Britain and France hate Stalin. So while Hitler is starting to talk to Stalin, Britain and France don't want to talk to him. And here is Hitler trying to talk Stalin, this great cartoon, and it says Stalin is a dirty red, and that is what the British and French are saying, and Hitler's saying, hey, we're closer together. And this shows the Franco-Soviet Pact, the threat of a pact between France and the Soviets could be a real problem to Hitler. But when, at the end of August, when talk of the Polish corridor is growing, Hitler flies his foreign minister von Ribbentrop. Von Ribbentrop flies to Moscow to meet with the Soviet foreign minister. Britain and France send their emissaries by ship. Takes them many times longer, about 7 times longer, and this infuriated Stalin. And that would lead to what shocked the world. On August 23rd, the Hitler-Stalin Non-Aggression Pact. And I don't know why these pictures all move, because when I set it up there, they worked perfectly fine. Let me get this out of the way because that's kind of weird. So let me move this picture down just a little bit and back to the Hitler-Stalin non-aggression, or the Hitler-Stalin Pact. It's a non-aggression pact. Sometimes you see it called the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. And Ribbentrop was the German foreign minister right there. Molotov right here is the Soviet foreign minister. And what this said is both the Soviet Union and Germany will create a pact where they agree not to attack each other. It's not a full-fledged alliance, but in essence it is. So Hitler knows that once Poland is defeated, and he does have to fight Britain and France, which he does want to knock them out, and also get revenge for the Treaty of Versailles, he won't have the Soviets come. So here's a couple pretty good cartoons. First one, there's a very creepy Stalin and Hitler being married and wonder how long the honeymoon will last. But this is my favorite. Here it shows Stalin and Hitler walking arm in arm, and it says someone is taking someone for a walk, implying somebody is tricking somebody else because they both have a pistol behind their back. And the thing about this is, both Stalin and Hitler entered this pact for opportunistic reasons, and both of them, especially Hitler, is thinking when it's going to be the best time to break this pact. And the oil wells in the distance is a very good part about this cartoon, because these are the things of the agreement. First off, they agreed to split Poland in two. Poland's doomed. Germany's going to attack from the west, and the Soviets agree to attack in the east. But Stalin is going to wait 2 weeks after the Germans attack, so he knows that the Poles will not be ready. The Soviets would get the Baltic states like Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. Soviets got territorial issues that Hitler actually really was upset about, especially Lithuania that had a lot of ethnic Germans. But the biggie, there'd be trade. And the trade would be, Germany would provide technical knowledge to the Soviets, while the Soviets would get oil. The Soviets would get oil. And the oil is the biggie. A modern army cannot fight with oil, and Germany has no real oil reserves. Romania would eventually become an ally, and they have some oil, but oil is everything. Remember in World War I, I started talking about total war, and how oil became more important than ever before. Now it is significantly more important. Germany will need this oil to fight. And one of the biggest excuses for the invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941 will be oil. So, Germany begins to attack, but you've noticed I have not talked about the United States. Here's the U.S. Ho-hum, no chance of contagion, and it's the great, and you notice who the cartoonist is, Dr. Seuss. Dr. Seuss was a political cartoonist before he became an author of children's books, which, yes, I like Dr. Seuss. But here is if you can't read it, it says ho-hum, no chance of contagion. And here is Stalinich, Hitleritis, Blitzpop, Nazi fever, fascist fever, Italian mumps. Italy was kind of becoming the butt of jokes by 1940. But the United States stayed out of this for lots of reasons, which we'll get to. But remember, though, this is an isolationist time, even though Roosevelt wanted some kind of action. So, on September 1st, 1939, Hitler invades Poland. And I'm going to jump the gun just a little bit. September 1st, 1939. Germany invades Poland. And I got to end it again. I don't know what happened. I don't know why these pictures are covering it. It wasn't like that when I started, but hey, that's life. And there were talks and negotiations to try to end this war for the whole month of August. But Hitler desperately wanted war. Britain and France tried everything to push it back, even though they knew war was coming. And they did have troops lined up along, the French did. Germany technically had troops, but we're going to jump right to, so Germany attacks Poland. And one thing I have to add is that what Germany tried to do is they tried to stage a fake attack. They tried to stage a fake attack. They had concentration camp victims. Remember, these are political prisoners. They were taken out, put in Polish uniforms, and executed, shot in front of a German radio station in Silesia. So right down here. And then they said that the Poles, without warning, the dastardly Poles attacked Germany, and the Germans have no choice but to declare war. Now, of course, everybody knew this was garbage. But there is one headline that does cover this. The Hitler neutralizes Polish menace, and you can see Poland as this creepy figure, and Germany stopped them. Europe relieved its historic German lived grim specter of Polish tyranny from continent. Belgium hides. Okay, yes, that's The Onion, and that's one of my favorite articles. And Japan forms alliance with white supremacists in a well-thought-out scheme. That's what we call clever. And so, obviously that's not what people thought. This was war. This was horrific. Britain and France sent out a warning and sent an ultimatum saying if you don't retreat from Poland in 24 hours, they'll declare war. Where's my mouse? But Britain and France, or Germany, did not stop the invasion, and Britain and France declared war. And boom, like a shot out of the dark, World War II began all over the world, and almost immediately they started calling it World War II. And that's not a good sign when you got a war immediately called World War II. That's or called a World War. And this shows a newspaper man in London. And the thing was, unlike World War I, remember I showed you those shots in World War I of those people marching through Berlin, those soldiers, and it was this jubilant mood, flowers, people putting flowers in rifle barrels, things like that. That did not happen here. The same in Germany, too. In France, people were desperately sad and worried. This was a tragic situation. They remembered World War I, and this was going to be hell. Especially in France, which had such a shortage of manpower and young men because of the low population rates. A lot of the soldiers who were called out to the reserves, remember mobilization, they called out the reserves, they were veterans of World War I. And they were like, you got to be kidding me, I'm being sent back? Or their sons being sent to go fight. This was not seen as a jubilant mood. Even though Germany, who was very worried about this, Germany would attack. But let's get back to one story about this before we talk very quickly about what happened in the invasion. Here's Germany surrounded by enemies. Before they invaded, the German general staff, which reluctantly supported Hitler because he remilitarized them, they were against the invasion of Poland. When they began to really rearm at the end of 36, the German military knew it takes a long time to aggressively rearm, especially since Germany wanted to keep the standard of living of regular Germans at home high. Remember I told you about the Volkswagen and radio and television. They seriously thought about overthrowing Hitler. Yeah, those generals wanted to fight the Soviets. They wanted to. But they didn't want to fight Britain and France and the Soviets, and that's what they thought happened. They seriously considered, but the coup was aborted. And that's one of the great what-ifs in history. What if they would have overthrown Hitler? Now, I'm not saying all of a sudden there would have been this great democratic government that cared about people's rights. It would have been a military dictatorship. There probably still would have been war, but it would have been, it's incalculable how different the world would be. The other thing is this. Remember I told you they started mobilizing at the end of 36. The German generals said, we will be ready to fight this war and mobilize and have our army ready to fight by 1945. That is when we'll have enough heavy-duty trucks and tanks, planes, and ready to fight. Hopefully you already know how ironic that is. 1945, that's when the war ended. Germany was ill prepared to fight. Less than 10% of their transportation was mechanized, meaning truck. Most of their men, most of their units still marched, and their artillery was pulled by horses. Everybody's going to make a big deal about it. German propaganda will make a big deal about what they call, and let's get back to here, Blitzkrieg or lightning war, using tanks, mechanized, which means armored and carried by trucks and armored cars, mechanized units sweeping through the old Polish units. This was a lot of propaganda. The Germans did use tanks and new weapons better than anybody else at that time, but they didn't have more or better tanks. And they masked their real weaknesses in the lack of forces. And this will come back to bite them in 1941. But Poland tried to defend all their borders with those blobs or Polish defenses. And what the Germans did is they set most of their tanks, which they didn't have very many or very good tanks, but better than Polish tanks, here or here and here. And their plans were two big sweeps to poke through the Polish lines and then encircle them. Their tactics are a lot like what they did in March of 1918 in their spring offensive. So a sweep here and here, and then a bigger one around Warsaw here and here. And it worked. They punched through the Polish defenses, surrounded massive Polish forces here and around Warsaw. It worked very well. And Poland collapsed pretty quick. Here's our German troops marching into Warsaw. I was going to put another picture there. I clearly did not. 2 weeks into the battle, the Soviets attack. And the Soviets overwhelmed the remaining Polish forces on that side. Poor Poland was doomed. Poland, the troops would fight bravely, but they didn't have very many tanks. They did have very effective cavalry, which could work behind the lines, but you can imagine how horse-drawn cavalry, horses don't like to charge machine guns or heavy artillery, and especially the tanks that the Germans had. One more thing. Poland is doomed. Germany would use terror bombing on Warsaw, killing over 4,000 civilians to force Poland to finally surrender. And after 1 month, Poland collapsed. And Poland's going to go through 6 years of absolute hell. Few countries will suffer more than the Polish people. And the second biggest population of Jews in the entire world was Poland. And that included many Jews that fled Germany after the Nuremberg laws and the Night of the Broken Glass. Poland will go through hell. The vast majority of the death camps created by the Germans in 1941 and 42 will be in Poland. Now, I'm going to talk about this later. Germany also came in and started eliminating what they called undesirables. Special units of the SS begin to execute political leaders, educational leaders, like lining up teachers and professors, political leaders, and some Jews. We'll come back to this when we get to the Soviet Union. But Poland collapsed. And these are German troops marching through Warsaw. Warsaw is going to be completely destroyed in World War II. You go to Warsaw today, and it is a rebuilt town, and it's very weird. While this is going on, Britain and France did nothing. We'll come back to this in just 1 second. Britain and France, they made a kind of, French soldiers bombarded a German town, but they didn't do much. So Warsaw was left to die. Now, a lot of Polish troops escaped through Romania, which was still neutral. They would eventually ally with the Germans, and made it to Britain. And they would fight. There'd be Polish units, including Polish fighter units, defending Britain during the Battle of Britain. And, oops, just 1 second. And they would be very helpful on German, or breaking the German wartime military code called Enigma. But Poland would fall. And while in the kind of euphoria of this happening, I can't find my mouse. What we consider the Axis would be created. The Rome-Berlin-Tokyo Axis, or the Tripartite Pact. Japan would ally themselves with Berlin and Rome, and this we call the Axis powers. But any common term, it was an anti-communist pact. It is to surround the Soviet Union. And so there's the foreign minister of Japan with, of course, Hitler and Mussolini. And this is where we get the Axis powers. Japan had already had a couple battles with the Soviets. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. And so while this is going on, The United States declared neutrality. While I'm talking, the mailman just arrived. The United States declared neutrality. The U.S. actually would pass 4 separate neutrality acts while this is going on. That the U.S. would not trade with Western powers. I did not mean to put the same cartoon in there again, but the old man in the sea. The Neutrality Act. Aid, or the U.S. holding back aid that will help the British win. And I thought I'd put a different cartoon in there. Best laid plans. So, but in 1939 they changed just a little bit. The U.S. would trade, but it would be cash and carry. The U.S. will not give any loans. They must give cold, hard cash. And since the U.S. did not trust British and French currency, it had to be backed by gold. And this is important. This is important because remember, one of the big issues for the United States entering World War I were the banks. And the banks had all that debt from Britain, and to make sure Britain paid back the debt, they wanted the U.S. to enter the war. The U.S. isn't going to allow that. No debt, cash and carry. This would become a crisis when France is defeated and Britain is out of gold. I got a couple questions. Yeah, Nathan answered it. Yeah, they would break it in 41, which ironically, part of the justification for Germany to break the Pact would be to take Russian oil. But if they're going to invade, they need something called oil. So back to this. Also, a group here in the United States was forming to keep the United States out of the war, called the American First Committee. And here it is in 1940, stay neutral. And you can see another Dr. Seuss of the American First, and I love the Adolf the Wolf. And the wolf chewed up the children and spit out their bones. But those were foreign children, and it didn't really matter. The American First. And their most vocal leader, their spokesperson, was Charles Lindbergh. And Lindbergh would, in fact, very famously in 1940, gave a speech not only saying the United States should not help, gave a speech in New York City, Madison Square Garden, but that Britain and France were no one to really help, especially Britain. And I have no idea how music started there. Why is there music? Does anybody hear music too? Okay, I'm really baffled by the whole music thing. I have no idea why music started. Mind the music. That's really weird. I must have put a picture on there that must have been connected to some music frame. That's really weird. So, here's the situation then in 1940. Poland fell. Poland fell. Here's France. And there's Poland split in two. So you see there's an independent Slovakia now that was a client state of Germany. Here's the German Empire. Italy was still technically neutral, even though they would invade Albania. Poor Albania. And Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg were all still neutral. So are Denmark and Norway. They have them as light blue. And so that's the situation in 1940. And Britain actually was desperate to avoid another battle of the Somme. And they thought the French would protect them. In fact, as Winston Churchill said, thank God for the French army. So we'll get to... There's the music again. right. I got to figure that one out. That's really weird. And I could see nowhere where it says there would be music. But this is going to begin what they call the Phoney War. And the Phoney War is where both the British and French, all through the fall of 39, the British and French faced off against the Germans, and no real fighting, no real bombing. Yes, both sides did begin submarine warfare in the blockade, almost immediately. That part of total war began. But they didn't really fight. All through the fall of 39, all the way till it ended rather abruptly in May of 1940. And both sides actually thought maybe we can escape without the hell. And so here are the first British soldiers aligning, and Hitler, look out, the jocks are coming. The jocks, another term for common British soldiers. Here are French soldiers picking flowers on the front, British soldiers on bikes. And instead of using bombs, you see that the RAF, the Royal Air Force, drops leaflets on Germany. And Hitler will send no warning, and this is telling people, watch out for German gas attacks on places like London. But there's no real fighting. In fact, remember the term Blitzkrieg, of that lightning war? Some wag turned that into Sitzkrieg, which, get it? Sit, haha. And here's a French poilu, or French soldier, sitting there with his machine gun. Here's actually the Belgian king walking past Belgian forces they're on alert. That is actually a German city that the French entered right on the border in September of 1940. They entered the city and then pulled right back out. That was the extent of their invasion. Sitzkrieg, and neither side really attacked. And Germany began to plan, and now they are mobilizing as fast as they could. They are pirating equipment from Czechoslovakia, which Czechoslovakia had some pretty good tanks and other equipment. They are building up as units, calling up reserves, hastily training them, hastily training officers as quickly as possible. And part of the reason that this was a Sitzkrieg is because the British and the French were convinced that the French had a great defensive idea, a line of fortifications on the German-French border that would be named after the French foreign minister, who was a veteran of the Battle of Verdun, the Maginot Line. And they began to construct these incredibly elaborate fortifications that would be on virtually every high ground. So any road, any way in between Germany and France would be covered by guns and interlocking guns. These underground fortresses would be underground cities that would have a defensive line along here. Now, when I was a little kid and I first heard about the Maginot Line, I was envisioning like the Great Wall of China, like this 7-foot wall going, or like Hadrian's Wall that separates England from Scotland that the Romans built. That's what I was thinking. It's not like that at all. These are key defensive spots. And the areas where they thought would be the best avenue of invasion, like right here, would have the most elaborate forts. And this is a article from Modern Mechanics magazine that shows a very elaborate underground fort, underground cities these virtually were. And the whole idea was to defend this so Germany cannot attack here. And then, some of you might be thinking, wait a second. So they might defend here. What about north of the Maginot Line? Which I don't have on a map, and I'm scared to go too far back. They would not put the line here at Belgium. The reason why is they would put their best forces in Belgium. The British and French would put their best forces there and force the Germans to attack through Belgium, thus limiting where they can attack. I should have put a better map here. But north of here, so up here, the British and French would put their best forces. And therefore, they could not attack here, thus limiting the area that Germany can attack. It's actually, as France is thinking, a pretty good idea. This pretty much knocks out a big hunk of where Germany can attack. So, best forces here. They know they can't attack through Switzerland because of the mountains, and therefore that border is pretty much locked off. And these forts are huge. This is a schematic diagram of one of the forts. These are two schematic diagrams of these incredibly elaborate forts. Underground cities with hospitals and ammunition dumps. They would funnel air. Some parts were even air conditioned. They had underground hospitals, underground galleys. They had little electric railways to connect the different parts of the forts. And this one showed all the forts from the Luxembourg border here. Now this area right here is called the Ardennes Forest. And they didn't defend that very hard because they figured nobody could come through the Ardennes Forest. It is too rugged, too many mountains. And here are some pictures of the forts. So you can see the men riding the little electric train, marching through. You see the train tracks. Here are guns in one of the fortresses. This is a levee. Here are some other of the guns. And some of these turrets could actually pop into the ground. This is what it looks like today. This is a tour I took of one of the forts, and I got to ride that little train. I got to ride that little train right there. And here are some of the turrets today. This is the entrance you go in. It's actually pretty remarkable. You go in these forts, and it is unreal how elaborate you are. You could see why the British and French thought they were pretty well defended behind these forts. And the forts are amazing. The Germans could not break through these forts. They couldn't break through. And the British and French had a good plan with a good army. So the Germans responded with their own wall called the Siegfried Line, or the West Wall. It is not near as elaborate. There are some bunkers here, and they call these round one pillboxes because they look like stuff you would put your pills in. And these elaborate anti-tank defenses called Dragon's Teeth, that's what they look like now. They're all still there. And they would kind of cover the whole line here. These were not near as elaborate, but they would have, at least give the idea to the Germans that we are going to be defended while we attack Poland. And this would become a formidable barrier in the winter of 44-45. So the German plan yellow, their basic plan was this. And you can see it here. They knew the Maginot Line be too hard to attack. And so the very unenthusiastic German generals were thinking, well, mass our forces against Belgium, sweep through Belgium, surround Paris, and attack the Maginot Line from the rear. So let me repeat that again. Where's my mouse again? Sweep through and attack here. This might look familiar to a lot of you. Isn't this the exact same plan that the Germans had at the Treaty of Versailles, or World War I, the Schlieffen Plan? They really didn't have any other plan. The German generals were completely unenthusiastic. They did not want this fight. In fact, there was another planned coup attempt in 1940. And a lot of generals were thinking Hitler is going to lead to our destruction. The British and the French, especially the formidable French army, which they had great respect for the French army. They knew the British army was tiny but was growing, and the British army also was heavily mechanized, and the British had a powerful air force. So the British sent some troops here. They kept most of their best planes in England, but they had a powerful air force and, of course, the powerful Royal Navy. And you can see right here in this map, a little bit harder to see, but the British and French will advance into Belgium and stop the Germans right there. So the British and French plan stopped them right there. And actually, all things considered, it's a pretty good plan. The problem was for the British and French, they decided to not defend the Ardennes. They put their weakest reserves here because they figured no strong German force could advance through the Ardennes. And the Germans kind of thought that too. They might attack here without going to the teeth of the Maginot Line. So they would attack here. Now the Belgians did have some pretty strong defenses along the rivers here. But one of the most amazing things happened in the history of the world. It's called the Mechelen Incident. And the Mechelen Incident, it's a little airport in Belgium. And what happened is this small little Messerschmitt transport plane, see right here, was carrying two German majors. And both of them were Luftwaffe majors. And one of them had the plans for Plan Yellow handcuffed to his wrist in a briefcase. So the briefcase is handcuffed to his wrist. And they were flying around the German border from the south through the north, not into Belgium, just skirting the Belgian border. This is January of 1940 during the Blitzkrieg. Well, the plane ran out of fuel and got lost in a storm. And so they needed to land and they were lost. And their pilot, Major Reinberger, he thought that he was over Germany. And so he crash landed near an airport in Mechelen, Belgium. Neutral Belgium. This is the memorial, and this is the mark where that plane crashed. You can see that's the plane. That's the monument today. I'm still baffled by the music. They crashed. And they got out of the plane, shaken, and saw some men coming towards them, and they were speaking French. Belgians speak French, or kind of a Dutch-German language. And they go, oh, we're in Belgium. And they go hide, they're in a wheat field, they go hide in some hedges nearby, and Holman's desperately is trying to open the briefcase. He gets it open before the Belgian, literally, police officers come, and they realize it's a German plane, and he gets a lighter out, and he's trying to burn them, and trying to burn the plans. These are the plans right here. He doesn't succeed. They are arrested for crossing the border without, basically a customs violation, and now the Belgians have the German plan. That plan to do basically the Schieffelin plan again. They secretly give these plans to the French, and the French are like, yes, we now know exactly our plan is perfect. Our plan is perfect, ready to stop the Germans. The Germans decide to change the plan. Hitler never liked this plan. And so he's going to take a radical new plan. Let me go. So let's look at this. Here's the plan. The British, see my mouse? That is the original German plan to attack along this line from here to here. The British and French plan, their best forces in their army, including most of their tanks, will be here. And they will advance to this river called the Dial River and dig in and stop the Germans. So this will happen the day the Germans attack. They basically did not defend the Ardennes region. This is the Ardennes force right here. They had their worst troops with virtually no tanks or anti-tank guns. And so the Germans adopt a very risky plan, picked by one of their best generals, as it turned out, General Erich von Manstein. And to fake an attack here, put almost all the German tanks right here for one powerful punch, advance through the Ardennes, sweep through behind the British and French lines, and cut them off at the sea, surrounding the best German and French forces. So, avoid the Maginot Line, but also take advantage of the British and French totally not understanding how the Ardennes force could be used. If they would have defended the Ardennes better, Britain and France could have stopped them there, because they would have got bogged down in the Ardennes, because there's only narrow roads. The German tanks, they put all of them right there, virtually all of them right there. They would get bogged down. And so Britain and France thought, we have the plan to stop the Germans, and the Germans switched the plans, and the French did not. So with that, it's not that the Maginot Line failed. It is that French planning failed, and French intelligence, because they never figured it out. And when they did get indications that the Germans were massing there, they ignored them. This is a victory for the Germans that should not have happened. While that's going on, I got to tell you a couple things really quick. It's called the Winter War. The Winter War of 39-40. While the Blitzkrieg is going on, the Soviets invaded Finland. They wanted to push Finland back away from Leningrad. My mouse is down here, so you can see the pointer right there. And also get bases in the Gulf of Finland, therefore into the Baltic. And Finland absolutely shocked the Soviets. Not only did the tiny Finnish army stop the Soviets. They beat them in a couple big battles. And the Soviet army was huge, and they were developing very good tanks. But remember, the purges weakened their officer corps. Here's a destroyed Soviet tank. Here are Finnish ski soldiers. So in the winter, the long winter nights, Finnish skiing soldiers would use the virtual silence of cross-country skiing to get behind the Soviets, make surprise attacks, demoralizing them. It was a disaster for the Soviets. Eventually, and I think I have this in the next slide, the Soviets would overwhelm the Finns. The Soviets would overwhelm the Finns, and they would win and take this land, the shaded land. Most of this land the Soviets would take from Finland. It's part of Russia today. But a couple things came out of this. First off, Hitler, who was really annoyed that the Soviets did this, but he had no choice, he needed their oil. Hitler saw the bad performance of the Soviet army and thought, I can defeat the Russians anytime I want. And don't forget, they beat them in World War I. The second thing, the Allies were convinced that they're going to have to help the Finns against the Soviets. And this is one of the great what-ifs in history. Britain and France, that winter, began to plan an attack on Norway, neutral Norway, up here, and to help the Finns. They thought they could then therefore weaken the Soviets and therefore weaken that non-aggression pact. So they're going to help the Finns. Also, they were thinking about cutting off the iron ore from these mines right here, iron ore shipments that were going to Germany from neutral Sweden. So they were thinking about, in a way, attacking Sweden too. This is so phenomenally stupid that it's hard to even wrap your mind around. Britain and France were at war with Germany, and they thought a good way to weaken Germany was to attack the largest country in the world with the largest oil reserves and the largest army in the world, who, yes, they had the purges, but would prove to be an awesome army, as in powerful. This would push the Soviets closer to Germany. It's the dumbest thing in the world, too, when you realize, start thinking about it. It is when the Germans invaded the Soviet Union and got close, but they were stopped, and then the Soviet Union destroyed the German army. It's the Soviets that broke the back of the German army. It's the Soviets that destroyed Germany. It's the Soviets that would change the entire course of history and do what people thought was impossible. It's mind-boggling, but fortunately this didn't happen. What happened instead was, in April of 1940, Germany ended the Blitzkrieg by attacking Norway. They wanted to make sure that Norway, their northern flank, would be protected, partially to assure the iron coming from Sweden. So here's a picture of the God of War. Here's the Western Front, the West Wall, and the Maginot Line. And what does the God of War do? It shoots Scandinavia. So, April 1940, Germany attacked Norway. But to get there, they had to attack through Denmark. Denmark had no army. And so Denmark would be quickly subdued and be under German occupation for 5 years. But then Germany, who really had no navy, committed everything they had to an attack on Norway. And they were helped by traitors within the Norwegian army. The most famous being Vidkun Quisling. And Quisling is right there. And he's sitting next, this is after Norway was taken, and he would be the administrator of German-run Norway. And he's sitting next to Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS right there. That's in Oslo. He was within the Norwegian government. He was seduced by Nazi ideology and that Aryan race, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Norwegians, right? And he made sure that the Norwegian government's reaction to the surprise German attack would be slow, would be uncoordinated, and therefore Norway could not respond. Norway did not have a standing army. It was all militia, like the National Guard. And so Germany did attack using their tiny navy and also transport ships disguised as troop ships, attacked Oslo, attacked Bergen, attacked Trondheim, all along the coast. Britain and France, which had an attack on Norway planned, remember what I told you, now operated that as a way to defend Norway. And there would be a couple big naval battles, including a British aircraft carrier would be surprised by a brand new German battleship and sunk. A huge bunch of naval battles. But Britain and France lined the troops right up here at a place called Narvik. And at Narvik, there'd be some heavy fighting. Those are French and British ski soldiers. Because it was so far north and so hard to get to and no real roads, the German troops who first went there were isolated. Britain and France took the city, but then badly led, poorly coordinated. They didn't send enough airplanes, so the German Air Force was able to overwhelm them. And here's a couple battles of the naval. There'll be a couple naval battles outside. That's Narvik being attacked. Eventually, Narvik would fall, and Germany would take Norway. This turned out to be a terrible move by Germany. 300,000 troops would eventually have to hold Norway, and they couldn't be involved in the rest of the fight. And Norway would be under German occupation. A lot of Norwegians did join the German SS. But that leads right up to the Battle of France, which would go May 10th to June 25th, even though the fighting would technically be over 2 days earlier. And these are German soldiers marching through the Champs-Élysées, the main avenue in France, right by the Arc de Triomphe. This was such a shocking victory for Germany, it's hard to even describe. So, we'll quickly do that in the invasion of Russia tomorrow. On Friday, Pearl Harbor, I'll put a quick quiz up. It's going to be another 10 questions, just like those quizzes before. Maps, have you got the maps? I'm grading through them, go through them. Same thing with notes, but please get them in. If after a week I don't grade it and you've turned it in, please let me know that you've turned it in. Because just like those tests, I gave you a lot of time. I know these are weird times, so we need lots of time to work on it. So you have lots of time to finish your Great Depression test. But I've graded a lot. But I'm going to start not going through those previous tests a lot. So if I miss it, please let me know. And the review list, like I told you, you have to go through all the way through the election of 1896. So that's on page 6. That is the area that I'm going to be grading the hardest. That's the area we need the most time to look at. And that should also make it a little bit easier, but when we review, I'll go through as much of that as possible. Are there any questions? Okay, we're still at a time where Germany can win this whole thing. And so this is a pretty scary time. All right. On that note then, let me... All right, I'm going to stop streaming. Let me look at one thing real quick. No other questions? Good? All right, we're ending the stream right now. Goodbye.